Good afternoon, everybody. Next week, we'll hear from Jeremy Mueller from the Electronic Computer Foundation. He's going to recommend that we go and encrypt everything. That's next week. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Tom Murphy from the Contra Costa Community Colleges, who's going to explain to us Unit. Let's welcome our speaker.
All right, I already forgot I was supposed to talk about hackathons. So you want to know about computer science education in community colleges? My philosophy? So, Berkeley's 8 miles away. Anybody know what a digital divide is? Digital divide. There was a huge one in Richmond, which is where the college is. You had Pixar used to be in Richmond, and did the people in the neighboring area to Richmond work at Pixar? No, there was a digital divide. They didn't have the necessary background to do that. My students are usually viewed, because most of them are like, maybe 70% graduate high school, let alone thinking of going to college. So there's a huge divide for them to go to a place like this, or Berkeley, right? So I only had 2 years with them. So I designed a curriculum that had 4 courses that they had to take in computer science and 4 courses in math. And I figured that would give them enough knowledge so that if they transferred to Berkeley, transferring is one thing. What's the hard part then? Staying there, yeah, completing it, right? Being able to survive at Berkeley. So, and what did I figure? And it turned out I was right. There were 2 things that I figured my students didn't have that the average Berkeley student had. And it was the ability to read a textbook, because especially for computer science, you have to keep teaching and reteaching yourself stuff, because you're never current. I've never worried about being current. I just learn when I need to learn. This summer I'm going to teach at the Blue Waters Institute, which I encourage you all to consider signing up for. Right? It's petascale education. It'll be the best of the undergraduates across the US will be selected from the people who apply, and then they'll be paid to have a year-long internship with the Shodar Foundation. Right? So the stuff I'm going to be teaching there, I haven't figured out yet. Right? I haven't figured out how to make the Xeon Phi, do wonders. But I'm confident that either I'm going to be able to, or else I'll talk about all my failures. Right? So do you guys know the engineering method? You know the scientific. What's the scientific method?
Okay, hypothesis tested.
Hypothesis tested, yeah. Needs to be reproducible, right? What's the engineering method? Any electrical engineers in here? Any computer scientists in here? Any people in here? Any gamers in here? Gamers understand the engineering method. Any gamers? What? Be proud. That's all I'm doing these days is playing video games, right? Because I'm kind of retired, sort of. So, engineering method, passion for failure. Now you're at a university, right? How does failure figure into your career at the university? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? It's a great thing! It's a wonderful thing! You want to know why? Because that's the heart of our life as computer scientists. 35 plus years, I worked as a computer scientist, right? And I realized, so my daughter was the one who helped me figure out this attribute and focus on it. My daughter's a genius. Anybody know Cal Poly? So she was a half-time barista, had a relationship, and she got out of Cal Poly in 6 years, which sounds like a really good thing. But when she left Cal Poly, she left with 3 majors and 3 minors. She's a genius, right? Chemistry, biochemistry, theater, those are the majors, and the minors were, there's 2 minors, women's studies and psychology, right? So, she told me about a time when a teacher asked her if she could do something, and she didn't raise her hand. She'd done it before, but she told me she wouldn't raise her hand unless she'd done it successfully 5 or 6 times, maybe 10 times, right? While there were other people in the room who didn't completely even understand what the question was, and they go, yeah, I can do it, right? There's different cultures, right? So that's one thing that my daughter helped me understand, which I always was curious. why are there so few women in computer science? Well, that's part of it. Now the other part is realizing the failure bit, right? What is the nature of computer science? Sciences in general. It's this passion for failure, right? What was my career? I would spend months working on something, getting it close to working, breaking it, getting it close to working, breaking it, and I finally got it working enough so I was satisfied, or the deadline hit, right? And then what happens? A few nanoseconds later, I'm bored with it, and I move on to the next broken thing, right? So what if you're coming from a culture, and this is true for both guys and girls, you may come from the culture where you want to have a sense of perfectionism. You don't want to do something unless you have a sense of mastery over it. Well, is computer science for you? People are going to go, no, because it's this broken thing. But it is. You just have a different model. And it's a valid model. You want to know what the model is? I call it a walled city, right? When you start off, your walled city might just be the chair you're sitting in. And for my students, when I teach C++, that is the only language worth teaching, and it really is C. But C++, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I-N-H-O, wherever that is. Anyway, your walled city is small, right? And as you get better and better, you increase the size of your walled city. Inside the city, complete mastery. Outside is the wilds. Does that describe computer science? Why, yes, it does, right? So it turned out I was able to get a lot of folk that normally wouldn't succeed in computer science to end up choosing to bust their buns and succeed. Because that was the other part of it is, no matter where you come in to learning, or come into here, right? There's going to be holes in your background, holes in your experience. What's your job to do? Have some teacher come along and scalp you and pour it into your head? No. You've got to do it yourself, right? It's nobody can give you that gift of doing it yourself. So passion for failure. Does that make sense? Now, it's not just failing, right? Anybody here are zombie coders? Yeah, don't do it anymore. All right, because, and again, my students would do that, right? Where they would change something and it wouldn't work. They'd change something, it wouldn't work. And they'd change it and get it working, and they were happy. But I tried to convince them they shouldn't be. Do you know why? Because code's fragile, right? It's always good to figure out why it doesn't work. So part of having the passion for failure is having the courage to analyze what went wrong and then try and do something better next time out to shoot. Does that make sense? And that's actually a part of the scientific method. It's just one that nobody talks about. All right. So what are my 4 courses? I already mentioned one of them.
C++.
Good. What else? There's 2 courses. Well, I needed to teach another language course. So if I'm not teaching C++, what is the other language course that I chose to teach? Python's a good choice. Berkeley went to Python.
Java.
No.
Ruby. Nice.
Not Ruby, although Dorothy likes that one.
Assembly.
I do teach assembly. I don't view that as a language. It's actually many languages, right? But assembly comes with the other class that I do, right? And at my college system, Contra Costa is part of DVC, is part of LMC, Diablo Valley College, Los Medanos College. Other 2 colleges have 2 classes in C++. I didn't have room for it, so I had 1 class in C++ where I did everything. Gaddis is the book I used. Great book. So, what's the other language? I'll give you a hint. It's a language that was used in the world's best textbook.
Perl?
No. That's good though. And by the way, is making guesses a good thing or a bad thing? In my opinion. In my class, I rewarded students for having wonderful failures. Getting it not right is inconsequential. Forming an opinion and stating it, really, really good.
C?
No, because for me, when I do C++, I do let my students know how much of it's C and how much of it is this object-oriented monstrosity that was, kind of tacked onto C.
Basic?
So, I like Java way, way, way better than Basic.
JavaScript.
I worked with Brendan Ike, who did JavaScript. No. Now that's good. So Fortran is a language that's still being used in high-performance computing. Why? Fourth. Now that's a good language. That's almost as good as BF. Anyway, the name of the book is Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. Berkeley, it's a 5-chapter book. Berkeley would do the first 4 chapters when they taught this class. I would do the first 3. And it's insane. It's a tough, tough book. What's the language of that book? Scheme. And did you look it up? Wait, who looked it up?
Actually, that was Dr. Kumar. He teaches, when he teaches
Ah!
programming languages, he uses that program.
I love Scheme. So why did I teach Scheme? My friend who I worked with from Earlham College was pissed at me. Can I say pissed here? He was mad at me for teaching my students Scheme. Why? You can't get a job in Scheme. He figured I was doing a disservice to my students. Why did I teach my students Scheme? Again, I lucked out. What's going on now on computers? They're going to functional programming. My son works at Apple. Scala is the language that they're focusing on there. He's working on learning it. It's a parallel language, right? It's a radically different language, hard to wrap your head around, but if you can wrap your head around C++, I figured, wrap your head around Scheme, you're going to be able to teach yourself more languages, right? And that was the gift I was trying to lead my students towards. So those are the 2 language classes. There's 2 other classes that I used. So I went to Berkeley. There were 2 classes I took there that powered me through my career in computer science. And by the way, a hint, somebody today mentioned, more than one person mentioned one of the classes. Think about it. I'll wait till you kind of structure your response. The data is not really hard on this one. Just structure it correctly and you'll know what the class is.
Data structures.
Data structures, yes! Right? Understanding algorithms is a way to beat out any hardware. A good algorithm can make a cruddy piece of hardware just spin crazy. That's why I asked if you're gamers, because the people who write game software really exploit the underlying hardware in wonderful ways. What's the other one? I alluded to, someone asked about another language, and I said it's actually a series of languages. Assembly, what's that usually a part of? At least for me it was. Computer architecture. So why is computer architecture important?
Understanding what's happening close to the middle.
Yeah, and what happens? So does that mean you do the rest of your programming in assembly?
No.
So what good is it?
You know what your high-level language is doing.
Yes, right? You know the cost of stuff that you're doing somewhat intuitively, right? And if something's going sideways in a way you don't understand, you have the ability to go all the way down to, I teach down to NAND gates. I teach them sequential logic and combinational logic. And then everything, all the layers of abstraction all the way up. Oh, and by the way, what I did with my students to get them ready for Berkeley is I gave them insane assignments. So the first assignment in the assembly language class was to do the towers in Hanoi in C++. That was just to make sure that they could do C++ and recursion, because most of the time, when's recursion covered in a course, typically? Often. Last thing, if at all, right? And recursion, is it important? Anybody know Amdahl's law? Anybody know Gustafson's law, which is a derivation of Amdahl's law? I was at a conference on a panel with John Gustafson. He said any teacher who teaches recursion should be shot. And then when it was my turn to speak, and I went, I teach recursion. Then I explained why, right? If you're doing high performance computing, is recursion going to be good for you or bad for you? By the way, this is an answer all my students can give to me. And they go, sweet, this one answer works for everything. But it's not so sweet because you have to explain it. It depends, right? Almost any good question that's asked you, the answer is it depends. Then you got to explain why, right? Anyway, Tower of Hanoi. The next one I had them do was the Tower of Hanoi in assembly language. The third one, they had to write, the last time I did it, they had to write a Mips 32 assembler. Not some toy assembler, a Mips 32 assembler. Why did I do that? Now, see, the reason I did it, you looked at each other and were going, ha, ha, ha. That's why I did it. Because I knew if my students got into an interview and they asked what was one of the toughest things you did, and they said, well, I wrote the, an assembler for the Mips 32 language, they'll go, whoa, I don't even know how I do that, right? Yes, right? People get hired. So the community college, I'm both vocational in a sense, as well as helping to prepare people to transfer to a four-year, right? Does that have any resonance with you? Are you being trained vocationally and also to continue on in the field of computer science? Well, the answer is yeah. In a sense, you're doing both, right? A key part of my philosophy is you better be able to code. During the summers, I teach faculty how to do parallel programming. And I was amazed at how many computer science teachers can't code. Right, again, I can understand that. If you're focusing on the theory and say the theory is the most important thing, then you may not have the ability to code. Your grad students will code for you, right? But I think everybody needs to be able to have it in their fingertips. Make sense? So I did teach Java finally, because a bunch of my students needed to have Java class, not the classes in Java, but a course in Java, so that they would look good on their resume and they could talk about it. And then I also tried introducing one other class. Introduction to Computer Science for non-computer science majors. Where is the best version of that class being taught right now, in my opinion? Berkeley. Who's teaching it? Dan Garcia. He's teaching a class entitled The Joy and Beauty of Computing. And he's using a language called Snap. So, those are my classes. For a while, I did offer a class as an introduction to computational science. And I used the language VenSim to do system dynamic modeling. And I had a whole group of sophomores in high school taking the class. Because at our college, there's a co-located high school, middle college, right? And I had the principal, parents, and my administration yelling at me because in one day I taught them integral calculus. I'm also a mathematician. I taught them integral calculus. Another day I taught them differential calculus. Did I teach them everything about it? No. Enough to understand the basics. Because it's not complicated, right? And then we did modeling of all sorts of stuff from physics, biology, chemistry, and they were going, we haven't covered this yet, right? And the students who were normally A students at that level as sophomores died in my class because they excelled at learning tons of facts, and then when it was time for the exam, they would go, and they get an A, right? Because they could regurgitate the facts back out. And I was asking them to apply that information. That goes back to the problem solving. It turns out everybody's looking for problem solvers. They even put it into the grammar school curriculum now, but you still have to have a teacher that understands problem solving, computational thinking in order to pull it off. Interesting. What questions you got so far? How am I doing time-wise? When's it over? Quarter two. Sweet. Yeah.
Can you repeat the name of that STEAM textbook?
Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. It's called the Purple Book or the Wizard Book, as opposed to the Dragon Book, which isn't being used anymore, but it's a pretty good book. Yeah.
Did you stop at a bachelor's degree, or did you pursue further?
Did I pursue? I love when students use the word like. You know, I could go to a class at ACT in San Francisco in voice and diction, which I did, and say, yes, I pursued a higher degree. Huh?
I think I said pursue.
You said like.
I did.
Like pursue. Yeah. So I did like pursue. So I have a master's in math, master's in computer science from UC Berkeley. Right? And then I didn't want to go for a PhD, but my daughter, who was going for a PhD, I was trying to get someone to pay for my PhD, because I didn't want to pay for it myself, I didn't really need it, so I'd get it before she did. We're that kind of family, right? In a friendly kind of competition. So, but she got it first. She has Dr. Jaws on her license plate because she's Jaws, right? And she's already invented, remember this oil spill in Louisiana? She invented a polymer that you can catalyze in a well casing, and it's like steel. Genius. So it's nice to be associated with her. Yeah.
How has your programming changed since you left Silicon Graphics?
Well, interesting. First 6 years at Silicon Graphics, I taught software developers how to do software development at SGI. And it was really confusing. What happened was, by the time I learned enough to teach them, I ended up owning the whole build system because I was the only one who understood it. But then, the last 6 years, all I used was Perl. If Python was out, it would have been Python, because Perl is awful in comparison to Python in my opinion. Right? And I tried, oh, by the way, do you guys, people, guys and girls, like challenges? Good answer. Anybody look at the site called Project Euler?
Yes.
How you guys doing on it? So I challenged all my students, past, present, and future, to collectively solve more than I could. And I also did that the last time I taught the Blue Waters Institute. And two of the people there, they probably already kicked my butt, but they haven't told me yet. Because I'm smart enough, but you know, there's people way smarter than I am. But I'm good at goading them. So, solve more than I solve. And I haven't touched it in 2 years.
How many you got?
I think 140, somewhere around there. Yeah. But Project Euler, why is that good? Anybody take any math classes?
Yeah.
And you've been able to integrate that into your knowledge? You can differentiate one thing from another? And if you learn stuff in computer science? So math helps you with that. So to do Project Euler well, you need to be able to move from a mathematical way of thinking into a computer science way of thinking. And I created a problem that I'm proud of. I wasn't going to tell you this, but I just realized now I can. It's called the squared deal. So if you look for HPC University and squared deal, it is the best problem I created. There were 4 of us who were running the supercomputing contest. My 3 friends couldn't solve it, but some of the teams that took it could solve it. And my friend who's a physicist crashed his supercomputer trying to solve it, because he just went ordered straightforwardly. There's 7 lines of C and 3 lines of math. So it's absolutely straightforward. But if you code it straightforwardly and don't analyze what it is, don't kind of problem solve with it, good luck. I know in 2,000 years, even if a Moore's law keeps going the way it is, computers won't be able to solve brute force, that one. Oh. Tell me who did this quote. You ready? The real problem is that programmers have spent far too much time worrying about efficiency in the wrong places and the wrong times. Premature optimization is the root of all evil, or at least most of it, in programming. Want a hint? This is a professor at a nearby college who, again, in an enlightened fashion, only had 28 grad students that worked with him because he wanted to make sure he had a perfect number of grad students. And the next perfect number after 28 is 496. And he knew he didn't want to have 496 grad students. Who said it? What's the first perfect number?
Is this Carmichael?
No. But it starts with the same sound, not the same letter, I don't think. He wrote The Art of Programming in 3 volumes. Donald Knuth. It is 1974 Turing Award. Why did I read you this quote? Do you have classes that teach you about efficiency and programming speed? That's good. This is an enlightened place. Most places across the US that teach computer science don't focus on performance programming. Why? There's good reason. For a long time, all someone had to do was wait, and the code would go faster, and they get paid more for making the code go faster. What was going on?
Process would get faster.
Huh? Process would get faster. That was Moore's law. Moore's law, he observed initially, every 12 months, for the same amount of money, you could have twice the number of transistors. Now, people have mutated it into other forms, and it's now roughly around every 2 years. For every 2 years, you can get a computer twice as fast, twice as more powerful as the one you have. So whenever you buy a computer, you have this nagging feeling that it's already out of date because it is. Right? Moore's Law. Performance. So is this a good quote on performance? I made my career as a performance programmer, dipping down into assembly when I needed to. But do you write the whole code in assembly? And if not, why not? Takes too long. Impossible to maintain. Fragile. Right? So what do? You take a class in data structures. You take a class in computer architecture. You get it into your fingertips. You cut codes at your best shot at something. And if it's good enough, it's good enough. My last 6 years at Silicon Graphics, I used Perl because that was good enough for the stuff that we were doing. And what I was doing was I was taking data, putting it on a website, and I basically used, made a compiler for data. So I took data, compiled it into a form that the developers could use to access information about Silicon Graphics stuff. And Perl was just fine for that. Good enough is important. Perfection sucks. If you can get something that's good enough that it doesn't suck, then that's good. If it sucks, fix the parts that suck, right? But know enough so that you can go in and tweak it and fix it, and break it, and have failures, and then move towards success. I've got another side to my piece of paper. Well, you want to talk about hackathons. What do you want to know about hackathons? So it turned out I do a lot of work with Intel. For a while, we were doing boatloads of Intel-sponsored hackathons. They were usually codathons at first, where we would do things using Node.js and JavaScript to do games in the browser. And then we moved to hardware, where we're actually having hardware hackathons. We did one where we were working with UNICEF in South Sudan. And there's actually a really cool video online about that Intel made. And the problem was, how do you help educate girls in South Sudan? And why was that important? Well, education is important in general. If they went away to a nearby village school, there was a high likelihood they'd get raped. Therefore, they didn't go to nearby village schools. And in fact, they usually got married when they're about 13 to avoid being raped and not getting the dowry. The dowry is an important part of the culture. There's about 47 different languages there. The infrastructure is, there's about 100 miles of road, at least when we did the work. So the guy from UNICEF talked to us and then said, and I love him, he said, fail fast and fail often. And this is an impossible problem. Why was that good? Why is that good for a hackathon? Can you get a working hunk of code at a hackathon? Yeah. If it's good, again, you define what good enough is. The way I look at it, I encourage people to do prototypes. Right? Want a good quote? Unamuno, Spanish philosopher, right, said, only he or she who attempts the absurd is capable of achieving the impossible. My students were helping to lead the hackathon at Stanford. Stanford students basically bailed on it, and my students worked on it, and they came up with a solution that the guy from UNICEF loved. But then there was a crisis in the country, and he had to leave, and we never have gone back to it. But there were people, he went to great design schools across the US, and these students were brilliant. And they came up with brilliant solutions, right? Genius. But they weren't easily implementable. The one my students came up with was highly implementable, very stable. So that was some of the hackathons we did. Then we were doing some with Intel's Edisons, some with the Galileos. It's fun. What specifically you want to know about hackathons?
Oh, I just mentioned that it was on there.
Yeah, and we did a hackathon here at Sac State. I have an artifact from that one. Anybody know what this is? Well, it's a USB stick, of course, because you just go like. You know, it sucks to be losing your vision. I'll tell you that. Anyway, there's a USB stick somewhere in here. Nobody knows the symbol? Havoc. Physics engine. Right? They had Project Anarchy, which was a game development engine, and my students came here because they went for training at the Havoc headquarters, and then we did game development hackathon here at Sac State. It's cool. Ready for this other one? I'll be done in plenty of time. It's good, huh?
Shall we wait until quantum computing is
Yeah, see, I was talking with my son about quantum computing. He has the same problem that I do with it. Any physicists here? See, my problem with quantum computing is it relies on an observer. The observer, and then suddenly the state gets fixed. Both of us have a problem with it. My conclusion is it's a model that's out there, but there's a better model we haven't come across yet, right? There used to be a model in biology where if you took flesh that used to be living and set it aside, there would be spontaneous generation and life would come from it. And it was true. That's what appeared to happen. Flies left eggs in the meat. The flies grew into maggots, and then they came forth from it. Right? So it looked like there was spontaneous generation. Was there really? No. That we had better models to help explain what was actually going on. That's what I think is going on with quantum computing. I don't know jack about quantum computing. I'm very uncertain about it. That I do know. Anybody know about the storage hierarchy? The tyranny of the storage hierarchy? What kind of storage do you got on computers?
Small, fast storage or
And what do you call the small, fast storage?
cache?
Cache is important in our society.
Registers.
And in fact, my daughter works for Square, and they have that Cache Act, which has nothing to do with this. Cache is fast. What else? Anything faster than cache?
Registers.
Registers, yeah. Registers. Anything faster than cache or slower than cache? What? Memory, yeah. Anything slower than memory? Huh?
Hard drives?
Disk? Sure. And there's more than one kind of cache. Why is there more than one kind of cache? Because we need balanced performance. If there's too wide a gap between the performance of registers and memory, then we need some form of storage that's somewhere in between. If we can do it by hook or by crook, then code will go faster, right? Because it goes back to performance programming. So the stuff I'm going to be talking about here is something that I think makes sense to talk about performance programming. So, registers. You got a lot of them? More registers than memory? Why?
Because they're expensive.
They're expensive. Yeah, so it's expensive and you don't have much of it. Why? Because it was cheaper, then you get more of it, right? So, registers, fast, not much of it. And as you have more of it, it's slower and it costs less, right? We have boatloads more disk space than we do memory. Boatloads more memory than we have level 1 cache or level 2 cache or level 3 cache. All right, Xeon Phi is what I've been playing with, right? And that's what I have some information on. I am a really simple mind. I need to understand something in simple terms and then I can grok it. Anybody use the word grok? So there's a book. Anybody know the name of the book that the grok appeared in? By Robert Heinlein. Stranger in a Strange Land. Good book. The word grok's good. Grok's completely understanding something all the way through. You know, it's in your fingertips. All right? So on a Xeon Phi, let's call in one cycle you can have one register access. Let's make it roughly in terms of distance. Right? So from here to the Smothers Brothers Winery is it's 13 miles. It's about 10 miles. So let's have 10 miles be roughly correspond to one cycle. So on the Xeon Phi, level 1 cache varies between traveling from here to Novato or here to SFO. Why is there a difference? Now, part of it, let me go through all of this, and we can start psyching out what the architecture must be on the Xeon Phi because of the characteristics of the storage hierarchy. So level 1 cache, Novato to SFO, close, this is what Intel's words, close L2 cache is 100 to 200 miles. So that roughly corresponds to Angels Camp to Carson City, right? It's a very celebrated place. Far away L2 cache is roughly Rapid City, South Dakota, roughly 1,000 miles. Memory. Memory is somewhere between Detroit, Michigan, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. And disk is basically traveling to the sun. Have you ever thought about the memory hierarchy this way? And why is it important to mention this? Where are we trending towards? Anybody have computers that have more than one, what do they call them? Apples have them. Huh? Cores, yeah, cores, right? So, how many people have computing things that have more than one core? Oh, many hands. Any of you have them in your phones? It's getting ubiquitous almost everywhere. Do you know how to program it? So that all the cores work at once? But it turns out most CS professors don't necessarily know how to program multiple cores because they didn't cover it in school, right? They can teach the theory, but again, to help people program it, it does help to be able to have done it yourself, right? So, Xeon 5, multiple cores, we're trending towards having more and more and more cores. In performance, it used to be you would try and hold CPU cycles almost sacred. You wanted to save as many cycles as possible. If we're trending towards thousands of cores, are CPU cycles going to be the most important thing? No. Well, what is then? What is starting to rear its head is something that's very important. I/O, yeah. Moving data around ends up being something hugely important. Emily? No. No, okay, what was it? I'm miserable at names. I'll go a whole semester and not know all my students. Suzanne.
Emily, I've never gotten that one before.
She knows how to do parallel programming. I already lost track of why I was going to mention that. On my embarrassment. Where were we? Oh yeah, I/O, right? We were talking about CUDA programming, and it's a deep memory model. That means you have to be very careful about I/O on a CUDA device. Do any of you own CUDA devices? Really? How do you have to own CUDA devices?
It's just in my NVIDIA chip.
Yes! If you have an NVIDIA chip on your laptop, you can program CUDA on your laptop. Isn't that cool? And like, for instance, my old MacBook Pro had 2 NVIDIA chips, and they were different architectures. So you could do all sorts of cool stuff. It's slow, but being able to do something is way more important than not being able to do something. So, yeah. This very carefully planned lecture, I think I'm done. And I carefully allowed 6 minutes for question and answers.
Are there any questions?
So you give the answers and I'll give the question. We'll do it like Jeopardy. No, go on.
So you said you had students at the JC construct these great, humongous projects, like humongous, making a 32-bit assembler. That's great. But if I'm in the JC, or even here as I am now, I'm a fourth-year student, and that's not crossing. So how would you go about nurturing this seemingly beginner CS student who make a 32-bit assembly?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my best stories about my student who experienced great success and great failure. He failed both classes I was teaching one semester. And that led up into the summer where he failed the 2 classes. A month after the end of class, he was co-teaching a workshop in parallel programming at Louisiana State University with me. How could that be? Failed 2 classes. Couldn't afford bus fare, and he was hugely embarrassed. So that got in the way of his education. A failure, you all know that. If you've not done well in a class, does that have anything to do with your ability? No, usually not, right? Classes are taught at one speed, and that doesn't work for anybody. It's either too fast or too slow, and sometimes it varies as you're going along through the class, right? Do the universities and colleges, my college, do we penalize people for not getting it in one semester? Yeah, they get D's and F's. Does that have anything to do with them acquiring the knowledge so they can use it productively? No, you take a class again. Students would ask me for a D rather than a C. Yeah. Because if they got a D, they could take the class again. If it was a C, they had to live with it. They listened. I mean, my students bought into another way of looking at doing this. So this student, I took him for 2 different summers, helping me teach a class in parallel programming, week-long workshop. One of the faculty member went to him and said, "What's your dissertation topic?" And he goes, "I'm a community college student." He goes, "Yeah, I understand that. What's your dissertation topic?" He couldn't wrap it in his head that a community college student was teaching him something he didn't know. So he must have been a grad student. Can you learn this stuff on your own?
Yes.
The answer is a resounding yes. I yell really loud, but we're towards the end and I don't want to get all your yes! Right? Computer science is one of those disciplines that's a gift you give yourself. No one can teach it to you. Again, if you do my philosophy of trying to get it in your fingertips, you have to go through that process of working at it, failing, succeeding, and gaining experience. Right? No one can give it to you. That's different than what you do on a test. Right, another question?
What began your passion for computer science growing up?
Good question. I was 16. I had access to some IBM equipment, and I wanted to impress a girl. So I had her nickname and a whole bunch of flowery purple prose that spelled out her nickname. And she and I just celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary on the 12th. That's also why I stopped teaching. I have students who are pissed at me for stopping teaching. Because in some sense, I'm still learning how to be a good teacher, but there's a lot of stuff I know about helping to form students, right? And they were angry that I stopped teaching. But once my wife retired, I just wanted to hang with her. So she and I just love hanging together, right? I missed a yoga class to come be with you today, so we do yoga twice a week. Who knew yoga was going to be so cool? Right? Very flexible. So my schedule was flexible, so I could get here. What other questions?
Like, why scheme? Like, how is it like very, very...
So Scheme is a beautiful language. The Project Euler, you have to do really fast, high-performance programming, right? Scheme is an interpreted language. I'm solving my Project Euler problems in Scheme because I know algorithm wins. And what happens on that, those kick my butt. I will have it down cold, right? I know I got it. Good algorithm. Doesn't run fast enough, right? And some of the problems I've gone through 10 cycles until I got it to a point where I finally got it to run fast enough. The goal on Project Euler is to have it run in 2 minutes. We got about 90 seconds, approximately. Yeah?
As we move towards more multi-core programming, where do you think that's going to make the biggest differences in the way that we use performance?
Well, what's interesting is because we've gone to multiple core, we have to start worrying about performance now. Because if you're going to try and code this stuff, you have to be aware of the metal. And so there's been 20 years of computer science classes where they're not focusing on performance. So for my students, I couldn't tailor the class and have it focus too heavy on performance, but I'm an evil sucker. So I use a grading program where if they didn't make the code run fast enough, the grading program would stop and terminate their code. Oh yeah. Well, see, here's what I do with my students. I love them. So what I do is, are we all fundamentally lazy? Are we all fundamentally procrastinators? That describes a good computer scientist. So my students have every intention of being good students. So what do? I constrain the situation and help them fulfill their desire to be good students. Same with you. I mean, how many of you would, if you're honest, would say you're a procrastinator and you're lazy? There's dozens of other things you want to do with your life, right? And school's just one of them.
Okay, thanks.